Jacob's story is an epic journey of faith, deception, and redemption that echoes through the ages. In a world where cunning often triumphs over integrity, Jacob's life confronts us with uncomfortable truths about human nature and the divine plan. Have you ever wondered how God can use imperfect people to fulfill His purposes? Get ready for a narrative that will challenge your notions of justice and mercy as we explore the surprising origin of a chosen nation. Genesis 25:21 introduces us to a couple in distress. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. In ancient times, barrenness was seen as a curse, and Rebekah carried that burden for 20 years. Imagine the despair that must have consumed the hearts of this couple, heirs to the promise made to Abraham, yet unable to conceive a child. God's answer to Isaac's prayer didn't come without complications. Genesis 25:22-23 reveals the babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." Rebekah's pregnancy was a foreshadowing of the conflict that would mark not only the lives of her sons, but entire nations. The divine prophecy overturned the natural order of things. The older would serve the younger. From the womb, God was setting a pattern that would challenge human conventions. Genesis 25:24-26 narrates the dramatic birth. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out, with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The contrast between the twins was evident from birth. Esau, the firstborn, was red and hairy, characteristics that foreshadowed his rugged and impulsive nature. Jacob, on the other hand, was born clutching his brother's heel, a gesture prophetic of his cunning and determined personality. As the boys grew, their differences became more pronounced. Genesis 25:27-28 describes, "The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Esau became a man of the field, skilled in hunting, embodying the masculine ideal of the time. In contrast, Jacob was quiet and domestic, preferring the life of the home. This division of personalities was reflected in their parents' preferences. Isaac favored Esau, while Rebekah preferred Jacob. Parental favoritism sowed the seeds of discord that would later flourish, offering a timeless lesson about the dangers of treating children unequally. The turning point in the brothers' youth came with a seemingly trivial incident that had profound consequences. Genesis 25:29-34 recounts, "Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, 'Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished.' That is why he was also called Edom. Jacob replied, 'First, sell me your birthright.' 'Look, I am about to die,' Esau said. 'What good is the birthright to me?' But Jacob said, 'Swear to me first.' So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and lentil stew. He ate and drank, and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. This episode reveals much about the character of both brothers. Esau, impulsive and driven by his immediate appetites, was willing to trade his birthright, a position of great honor and responsibility in patriarchal society, for a meal. His exaggerated claim of being about to die shows his tendency toward hyperbole and instant gratification. Jacob, on the other hand, displayed calculated shrewdness. He saw an opportunity and seized it, manipulating his brother's weakness for his own gain. While his actions may seem questionable by modern standards, they reveal a sharp understanding of the value of the birthright and a willingness to do whatever it took to obtain it. The exchange of the birthright for a meal became a powerful symbol of Esau's recklessness and Jacob's opportunistic nature. The biblical text does not offer explicit moral judgment on Jacob's actions at this moment, but the subsequent narrative will show how this decision shaped the destinies of both brothers and their descendants. The implications of this act were profound. The birthright was not merely a matter of material inheritance, it carried spiritual blessings and the responsibility to lead the family. By despising his birthright, Esau demonstrated a lack of foresight and appreciation for the divine promises made to his ancestors. For Jacob, acquiring the birthright was only the first step in his journey to becoming the heir of God's promises. Though his methods were questionable, his determination to secure divine blessings would be a recurring theme in his life. This episode sets the stage for the future events in Jacob's life. His cunning and determination would lead him to great heights, but also place him in situations of conflict and danger. Jacob's story reminds us that God can use even our flaws and imperfections to fulfill his greater purposes. Genesis 27:1-4 takes us to a crucial moment in Isaac's life. When Isaac was old and almost blind, he called for his older son Esau and said, "My son." "Yes, father," he answered. Isaac said, "I am old and do not know the day of my death. Now take your weapons, your bow and your quiver, and go out to the field to hunt game for me. Prepare for me the delicious food I love, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may bless you before I die." Isaac's old age and blindness created a scene of urgency and vulnerability. Aware of his mortality, he wanted to fulfill his paternal duty to bless his firstborn before leaving this world. The blessing was not merely a formality, it was a prophetic and powerful act that would determine the destiny of the blessed and his descendants. Isaac's plan to bless Esau reveals his continued preference for the older son, despite the sale of the birthright years earlier. Perhaps Isaac was unaware of the agreement between the brothers or considered it invalid. Regardless, his intention to bless Esau triggered a series of events that would forever change the course of the family's history. Genesis 27:5-10 introduces Rebekah's strategy to favor Jacob. Now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "I heard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me game and prepare me the delicious food to eat, so that I may bless you in the presence of the Lord before I die. Now my son, listen to me as I command you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats, so that I can prepare some delicious food for your father, the kind he loves. Then take it to your father to eat, so he may bless you before he dies." Rebekah's plan was bold and risky. She not only interfered with her husband's will, but also placed her favorite son in a dangerous position. Her actions reflect a complex mix of motives: the desire to see God's prophecy fulfilled that the older will serve the younger, her preference for Jacob, and possibly her belief that Jacob was more suited to lead the family. The preparation of the stew was just the first step. Genesis 27:11-17 details Jacob's elaborate disguise. But Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing." His mother said to him, "My son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Go and get them for me." So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and she prepared the delicious food, the kind his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had at home, and put them on her younger son Jacob. She also covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with the goat skins. Then she handed to her son Jacob the delicious food and the bread she had made. This passage reveals Jacob's initial hesitation, not from moral principles, but from fear of being caught. Rebekah's response, taking responsibility for any curse, demonstrates her determination to see her plan realized. The elaborate disguise, using Esau's clothes and goat skins, shows how far they were willing to go to deceive Isaac. Jacob's encounter with Isaac is narrated in Genesis 27:18-29 with palpable tension. Jacob went to his father and said, "My father." "Yes, who are you, my son?" Isaac asked. Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game, so that you may bless me." Isaac asked his son, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" "The Lord your God gave me success," he replied. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you really are my son Esau or not." The scene is filled with suspense. Jacob repeatedly lies, even invoking God's name to lend credibility to his story. Isaac, suspicious, insists on touching his son. Genesis 27:22-23 continues, "Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, 'The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau.' He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau, so he blessed him." The test of touch reveals Isaac's internal conflict. His senses are at odds. Touch says it's Esau, but the voice is Jacob's. Yet, trusting his sense of touch more than his hearing, Isaac proceeds with the blessing. The blessing given to Jacob, recorded in Genesis 27:27-29, is powerful and comprehensive. He smelled the smell of his clothes and blessed him, saying, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of heaven's dew and of earth's richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you." This blessing, rich in imagery and promises, encompasses material prosperity, political dominion, and a special spiritual status. Ironically, the blessing includes dominion over his brothers, echoing the prophecy given before the twins were born. Esau's return and the discovery of the deception are narrated with dramatic intensity in Genesis 27:30-35. After Isaac finished blessing him, and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, his brother Esau came in from hunting. He too prepared some delicious food and brought it to his father. Then he said to him, "My father, sit up and eat some of my game so that you may bless me." His father Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" "I am Esau, your firstborn," he answered. Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." When Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, "Bless me, me too, my father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." Isaac's reaction, trembling violently, reveals the shock and horror of the discovery. His declaration, "And indeed he will be blessed," indicates his understanding that the blessing, once spoken, could not be revoked. It was a prophetic word, not merely a paternal wish. Esau's despair is palpable. Genesis 27:36-38 captures his anguish. Esau said, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? This is the second time he has taken advantage of me. He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing." Then he asked, "Haven't you reserved any blessing for me?" Isaac answered Esau, "I have made him lord over you and have made all his relatives his servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son?" Esau said to his father, "Do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father." Then Esau wept aloud. Esau's pain is deep, but it also reveals his previous lack of understanding about the value of the birthright. Only now does he fully grasp what he has lost. His plea for a blessing, any blessing, is touching. Isaac offers Esau a secondary blessing in Genesis 27:39-40. His father Isaac answered him, "Your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness, away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck." This blessing, in stark contrast to Jacob's, foretells a life of struggle for Esau and his descendants. However, it also includes a promise of eventual liberation from Jacob's rule. Esau's threat of revenge is immediate and serious. Genesis 27:41 reports, Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. He said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near, then I will kill my brother Jacob." This plan for murder reveals the depth of Esau's anger and the imminent danger to Jacob. The situation demands swift action. Genesis 27:42-45 outlines Rebekah's plan for Jacob's escape. When Rebekah was told what her older son Esau had said, she sent for her younger son Jacob and said to him, "Esau is planning to kill you. Now then, my son, do what I say. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him for a while until your brother's fury subsides. When your brother is no longer angry and forgets what you did to him, I'll send word for you to come back from there. Why should I lose both of you in one day?" Rebekah's plan demonstrates her ongoing cunning. She not only protects Jacob from Esau's immediate wrath, but also ensures the continuity of the promised lineage. Her last statement suggests she fears not only for Jacob's life, but also for the consequences Esau would face if he killed his brother. Jacob's departure for Haran, narrated in Genesis 28:1-5, marks the beginning of a new chapter in his life. Isaac called for Jacob and blessed him. Then he commanded him, "Do not marry a Canaanite woman. Go at once to Paddan Aram, to the house of your mother's father Bethuel. Take a wife for yourself there from among the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and increase your numbers until you become a community of peoples. May he give you and your descendants the blessing given to Abraham, so that you may take possession of the land where you now reside as a foreigner, the land God gave to Abraham." Then Isaac sent Jacob on his way, and he went to Paddan Aram, to Laban son of Bethuel the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, who was the mother of Jacob and Esau. This passage reveals that Isaac, despite the deception, accepts God's will and blesses Jacob again, this time knowingly. He also gives specific instructions about marriage, emphasizing the importance of maintaining the purity of the family line. Thus, Jacob departs, leaving behind a divided family and an enraged brother. His journey to Haran is not just a physical escape, but the beginning of a spiritual transformation. The events that follow will shape his character and prepare him to become Israel, the father of the 12 tribes. The story of Jacob's deception and flight is a powerful reminder of how human actions, even those motivated by ambition or fear, can be used by God to fulfill his greater purposes. It also illustrates the lasting consequences of our choices and the complexity of family relationships. Genesis 28:10-11 marks the beginning of Jacob's journey toward Haran. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. Imagine Jacob, alone for the first time in his life, fleeing from home, sleeping out in the open with only a stone for a pillow. It is at this moment of vulnerability that God chooses to reveal himself to Jacob in an extraordinary way. Genesis 28:12-15 describes Jacob's famous dream. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. This vision of the stairway to heaven is a powerful revelation of the connection between heaven and earth, and of God's constant presence in Jacob's life. The divine promise reaffirms the blessings given to Abraham and Isaac, now extended directly to Jacob. Jacob's response, recorded in Genesis 28:16-22, reveals a profound spiritual transformation. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, If God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give you 1/10. This vow marks the beginning of a personal relationship between Jacob and God. For the first time, we see Jacob acknowledging God not only as the God of his fathers, but as his own God. Jacob's arrival in Haran is narrated in Genesis 29:1-12, culminating in his encounter with Rachel at the well. Then Jacob continued his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. There he saw a well in the field, with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it, because the flocks drank from that well. A large stone covered the mouth of the well. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We are from Haran," they replied. He asked them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" "Yes, we know him," they answered. Then Jacob asked, "Is he well?" "Yes, he is," they said, "and here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep." "Look," Jacob said, "the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to graze." "We can't," they replied, "until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the well's mouth. Then we will water the sheep." While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. As soon as Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the well's mouth and watered his uncle Laban's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and that he was the son of Rebekah. She ran and told her father. This encounter at the well echoes similar meetings in his family history, such as Abraham's servant finding Rebekah. Jacob's action of single-handedly rolling away the heavy stone from the well demonstrates his physical strength and his desire to impress Rachel. The reunion with Laban's family is warm, as described in Genesis 29:13-14. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood. However, Laban's initial hospitality quickly turns into a work agreement, as we see in Genesis 29:15-20. Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "It's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me." So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. This agreement reveals both Jacob's deep love for Rachel and Laban's calculating nature. The 7 years of labor are an ironic inversion of Jacob's situation. He, who deceived his father and brother, now works faithfully for 7 years. The deceptive marriage is narrated in Genesis 29:21-25. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, my time is completed, and I want to lie with her." So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob lay with her. Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" The irony of this situation cannot be overlooked. Jacob, who deceived his blind father, is now deceived in the darkness of his wedding night. Jacob's question, "Why have you deceived me?" echoes the question that Esau must have asked him years before. Laban's response and the second agreement are described in Genesis 29:26-30. Laban replied, "It is not our custom to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week. Then we will give you the younger one in return for another 7 years of work." And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob lay with Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and he worked for Laban another 7 years. Thus Jacob finds himself married to 2 sisters, a situation that will create tension and rivalry in the years to come. Jacob's preferential love for Rachel mirrors the favoritism of his own parents, perpetuating a cycle of family conflict. Jacob's children are born amid this rivalry, as described in Genesis 29:31-35 and 31:24. Leah gives birth to Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Rachel, unable to conceive, gives her servant Bilhah to Jacob, who bears Dan and Naphtali. Leah, seeing that she stopped having children, gives her servant Zilpah to Jacob, who bears Gad and Asher. Leah then conceives again and gives birth to Issachar and Zebulun. Finally, Rachel conceives and gives birth to Joseph. This narrative of births is filled with tension and competition between the sisters, each seeking to gain Jacob's favor through motherhood. The names given to the children often reflect their mother's emotions and hopes. The years in Haran transformed Jacob from a young bachelor into a man with a large and complex family. Through deceit, hard work, and family rivalries, Jacob begins to experience the consequences of his past actions. However, amid all this, we see the gradual fulfillment of God's promise to make him a great nation. Genesis 30:25-28 marks the beginning of Jacob's desire to return to his homeland. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me on my way so I can go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and children, for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I have done for you." But Laban said to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you." He added, "Name your wages, and I will pay them." This passage reveals the tension between Jacob's desire to return and Laban's desire to keep him, recognizing the blessings Jacob has brought. Jacob's prosperity as a shepherd is described in Genesis 30:29-43. Jacob proposes an apparently unfavorable deal for himself, asking only for the speckled and spotted animals from the flock. However, through a combination of selective breeding and possibly divine intervention, Jacob manages to significantly increase his wealth. Genesis 31:1-3 describes the growing resentment of Laban's sons and God's command for Jacob to return. Jacob, however, heard that Laban's sons were saying, "Jacob has taken everything that belonged to our father and gained all this wealth at our father's expense." And Jacob noticed that Laban no longer treated him as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, "Return to the land of your ancestors and to your own people, and I will be with you." The secret planning of the departure is narrated in Genesis 31:4-13, where Jacob explains the situation to Rachel and Leah, revealing a dream in which God instructed him to leave. Jacob's wives support his decision, acknowledging their father's unjust treatment. Genesis 31:17-21 describes the escape during the sheep shearing. Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Paddan Aram, to go back to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was fleeing. He fled with all he had, crossed the Euphrates River, and headed for the hill country of Gilead. Rachel's theft of the household gods adds complexity to the situation, possibly indicating her reluctance to sever ties with her family completely. The pursuit of Laban is narrated in Genesis 31:22-25. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. Taking his relatives with him, Laban pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. Then God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Laban overtook him, and Laban and his relatives camped there too. God's warning to Laban in a dream demonstrates his continued protection over Jacob, even when Jacob's actions were questionable. The confrontation on Mount Gilead is described in Genesis 31:26-42. Laban accuses Jacob of secretly fleeing and stealing his household gods. Unaware of Rachel's theft, Jacob allows Laban to search the entire camp. Rachel, sitting on the gods, deceives her father by claiming she cannot get up because of her menstrual period, preventing him from searching where she was sitting. Jacob then expresses his frustration over Laban's treatment over the years. "For 20 years I was with you. Your sheep and goats did not miscarry, nor did I eat rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself, and you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. The heat consumed me in the daytime and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for 20 years I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you." This passionate speech reveals Jacob's sense of injustice and his belief in divine intervention on his behalf. The covenant between Jacob and Laban is established in Genesis 31:43-55. They set up a heap of stones as a witness to their agreement not to harm each other. Laban calls the heap Jegar Sahadutha in Aramaic, while Jacob calls it Galid in Hebrew, both meaning heap of witness. Genesis 31:55 marks their final separation. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home. With this farewell, a significant chapter of Jacob's life comes to an end. He leaves Haran no longer as a young man, but as the patriarch of a large and prosperous family. The encounter with angels at Mahanaim is briefly mentioned in Genesis 32:1-2. Jacob also went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is the camp of God." So he named that place Mahanaim. This encounter serves as a reminder of God's continued presence and protection, preparing Jacob for the challenge ahead. The preparation for the meeting with Esau is narrated in Genesis 32:3-21. Jacob sends messengers ahead to inform Esau of his arrival. When the messengers return with the news that Esau is coming to meet him with 400 men, Jacob is terrified. In his fear, Jacob divides his group into two camps, thinking, if Esau comes and attacks one camp, the other camp may escape. Then he prays fervently to God. "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, 'Go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper,' I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, 'I will surely make you prosper, and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted.'" This prayer reveals Jacob's inner struggle between fear and faith, reminding God of his promises while acknowledging his own unworthiness. Jacob also prepares a substantial gift for Esau, sending it in separate groups ahead of him, hoping to appease his brother. Thus ends Jacob's preparation for the encounter he has dreaded for 20 years. The man who left his land as a fugitive now returns as a prosperous patriarch, still grappling with the consequences of his past actions and his faith in God. Genesis 32:22-32 narrates one of the most enigmatic and transformative episodes in Jacob's life, his struggle with the angel at Peniel. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. This nighttime struggle symbolizes Jacob's internal battle with his past and his future. The text continues, "When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, 'Let me go, for it is daybreak.' But Jacob replied, 'I will not let you go unless you bless me.' The man asked him, 'What is your name?' 'Jacob,' he answered. Then the man said, 'Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome.'" The change of Jacob's name to Israel marks a profound transformation in his identity. No longer the supplanter, he is now one who struggles with God. Jacob emerges from this experience blessed, yet also wounded, limping due to the blow to his thigh. This physical injury serves as a constant reminder of his encounter with the divine. The long-feared meeting with Esau finally occurs in Genesis 33:1-11. Jacob looked up and saw Esau approaching, and with him were 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 maids. He put the maids and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. Jacob's cautious approach, bowing 7 times, demonstrates his submission and desire for reconciliation. However, Esau's reaction surprises everyone. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. This moment of reconciliation is powerful and unexpected. Esau's embrace and tears show that time has healed old wounds. The dialogue that follows reveals the generosity of both brothers. Jacob insists that Esau accept his gifts, saying, "Please accept the gift that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need." After this emotional encounter, the brothers part amicably. Genesis 33:16-17 states, "That day Esau started on his way back to Seir. Jacob, however, went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. That is why the place is called Succoth." Jacob's establishment in Succoth and later in Shechem marks the beginning of a new phase in his life. Genesis 33:18-20 says, "After Jacob came from Paddan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan and camped within sight of the city. For 100 pieces of silver he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohi Israel." However, Jacob's newly found peace is shaken by the incident involving his daughter Dinah, narrated in Genesis 34. Dinah, the daughter Leah had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of that area, saw her, he took her and raped her. Dinah's violation by Shechem triggers a series of tragic events. Although Shechem falls in love with Dinah and asks to marry her, Jacob's sons, particularly Simeon and Levi, plot revenge. They deceive the Shechemites into agreeing to circumcision as a condition for the marriage, and then, while the men are recovering from the circumcision, Simeon and Levi attack the city, killing all the men. Jacob's reaction to this massacre is one of horror and concern. Genesis 34:30 records, "Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, 'You have brought trouble on me by making me a stench to the Canaanites and Perizzites, the people living in this land. We are few in number. If they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed.'" After this traumatic incident, God instructs Jacob to go to Bethel. Genesis 35:2-3 shows Jacob leading his family in an act of spiritual purification. "So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, 'Get rid of the foreign gods you have with you, and purify yourselves and change your clothes. Then come, let us go up to Bethel, where I will build an altar to God, who answered me in my day of distress, and who has been with me wherever I have gone.'" In Bethel, God reaffirms his promise to Jacob and confirms his name change to Israel. Genesis 35:10-12 says, "God said to him, 'Your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel.' So he named him Israel. And God said to him, 'I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and increase in number. A nation and a community of nations will come from you, and kings will be among your descendants. The land I gave to Abraham and Isaac I give to you, and I will give this land to your descendants after you.'" On the journey from Bethel to Ephrath, Rachel goes into labor. Genesis 35:16-20 narrates, "Then they moved on from Bethel. While they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth and had great difficulty. And as she was having great difficulty in childbirth, the midwife said to her, 'Don't despair, for you have another son.' As she breathed her last, for she was dying, she named her son Ben-Oni, but his father named him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Rachel's death during Benjamin's birth is a devastating blow to Jacob, marking the end of a significant chapter in his life. The chapter concludes with a final trial for Jacob, the incident involving Reuben and Bilhah, briefly mentioned in Genesis 35:22. While Israel was living in that region, Reuben went in and slept with his father's concubine Bilhah, and Israel heard of it. This act by Reuben, the firstborn, will have lasting consequences, affecting his position in the family and his future inheritance. Thus, this period in Jacob's life is marked by reconciliation and spiritual renewal, but also by personal and familial tragedies that continue to shape his character and the future of his lineage. Genesis 35:27 marks Jacob's return to his father's house. Jacob came home to his father Isaac in Mamre, near Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had stayed. This return completes the cycle of Jacob's journey, bringing him back to his roots. The death and burial of Isaac are briefly narrated in Genesis 35:28-29. Isaac lived 180 years. Then he breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people, old and full of years. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. This moment of mourning briefly unites the brothers once again. The narrative then shifts to Joseph, Jacob's favorite son. Genesis 37:3-4 describes, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him, and could not speak a kind word to him." Jacob's favoritism toward Joseph echoes Jacob's own past as his mother's favorite son, creating similar family tensions. The special coat, often translated as coat of many colors, becomes a tangible symbol of this favoritism. Joseph's dreams, narrated in Genesis 37:5-11, intensify his brother's jealousy. Joseph dreams that his sheaves of wheat rise while his brother's sheaves bow down to him. In another dream, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bow down to him. These prophetic dreams, although poorly received by his brothers and even by his father, foreshadow Joseph's future role as the savior of his family. The sale of Joseph by his brothers is a dramatic turning point in the story. Genesis 37:18-20 recounts their initial plan to kill him, but they saw him from a distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to one another. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." Reuben's intervention, described in Genesis 37:21-22, saves Joseph's life. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands, saying, "Let's not take his life." He said, "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. However, Judah's suggestion to sell him prevails. Genesis 37:26-28 narrates, "Judah said to his brothers, 'What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood.' His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. The deception of Jacob's sons is detailed in Genesis 37:31-33. Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Jacob's intense mourning is poignant. Genesis 37:34-35 describes, "Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. 'No,' he said, 'I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave.' So his father wept for him. The years of sadness and mourning for Joseph are a dark period in Jacob's life. Unaware of his beloved son's true fate, he lives with deep pain that even the rest of his family cannot alleviate. The narrative then moves to a time of famine in the land of Canaan. Genesis 42:1-2 recounts, "When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, 'Why do you just keep looking at each other?' He continued, 'I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die.' Sending his sons to Egypt to buy food sets off a chain of events that will eventually lead to the family reunion. The detention of Simeon in Egypt and the demand to bring Benjamin on the next visit create a dilemma for Jacob. Genesis 42:36 captures Jacob's anguish. Their father Jacob said to them, "You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me." His reluctance to send Benjamin, the last son of his beloved Rachel, is understandable in light of his previous losses. The second trip to Egypt with Benjamin is narrated in Genesis 43. Judah's insistence and his personal guarantee for Benjamin's safety finally convinced Jacob to let him go. Genesis 43:11-14 shows Jacob blessing the mission. Then their father Israel said to them, "If it must be, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your bags and take them down to the man as a gift. A little balm and a little honey, some spices and myrrh, some pistachio nuts and almonds. Take double the amount of silver with you, for you must return the silver that was put back into the mouths of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother also, and go back to the man at once. And may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you. As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved." Joseph's revelation to his brothers, narrated in Genesis 45, is one of the most emotional moments in the biblical narrative. When Joseph finally reveals himself, he sends his brothers back with a message for Jacob in Genesis 45:9-11. "Now hurry back to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute." The invitation for Jacob to move to Egypt is initially met with disbelief. Genesis 45:26-28 describes, "They told him, 'Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all Egypt.' Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, "I'm convinced. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." Jacob's initial hesitation is understandable given the magnitude of the news. However, he receives divine confirmation in Beersheba, as narrated in Genesis 46:2-4. "And God spoke to Israel in a vision at night and said, 'Jacob, Jacob.' 'Here I am,' he replied. Then God said, 'I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again, and Joseph's own hand will close your eyes.'" The journey to Egypt and the emotional reunion with Joseph are described in Genesis 46:29-30. Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Israel said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." The settlement in the land of Goshen marks the beginning of the final phase of Jacob's life. Genesis 47, 7-10 narrates Jacob's encounter with Pharaoh. Then Joseph brought his father Jacob in and presented him before Pharaoh. After Jacob blessed Pharaoh, Pharaoh asked him, "How old are you?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers." Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. The last 17 years of Jacob's life in Egypt were a time of relative peace and prosperity. Genesis 47, 27-28 summarizes, "Now the Israelites settled in Egypt in the region of Goshen. They acquired property there and were fruitful and increased greatly in number. Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years, and the years of his life were 147. Jacob's final blessings are recorded in Genesis 48 and 49. He adopts Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph's sons, as his own, elevating them to the status of tribes. In a reflection of his own story, Jacob crosses his hands as he blesses them, giving the younger, Ephraim, the greater blessing. The prophecies for each of Jacob's 12 sons, narrated in Genesis 49, are rich in symbolism and meaning for Israel's future as a nation. Each son receives a blessing, or in some cases, a rebuke, that will shape the destiny of his tribe. Jacob's instructions for his burial are clear and emphatic. Genesis 49, 29-32 records, "Then Jacob gave them these instructions. I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite, the cave in the field of Machpelah, near Mamre in Canaan, which Abraham bought along with the field as a burial place from Ephron the Hittite. There Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried, and there I buried Leah." Jacob's death and the national mourning in Egypt are described in Genesis 49, 33-53. When Jacob had finished giving instructions to his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Joseph threw himself on his father and wept over him and kissed him. Then Joseph directed the physicians in his service to embalm his father Israel. So the physicians embalmed him, taking a full 40 days, for that was the time required for embalming. And the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. The grand funeral and burial in the cave of Machpelah, narrated in Genesis 50, 7-13, mark the end of Jacob's earthly life, but not the end of his legacy. His life, marked by struggles, deceit, loss, and reconciliation, stands as a testament to God's faithfulness and the complexity of the human experience. Jacob's journey shows us that God can use even our failures and struggles to fulfill his purposes. What lessons have you drawn from the life of this patriarch? How does Jacob's story relate to your own journey of faith? If this video touched your heart or made you reflect, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who could benefit from this message. Jacob's story reminds us that transformation is possible for all of us. Did you enjoy this content? Then don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos about biblical characters and the life lessons we can learn from them. Remember, just as God worked in Jacob's life, he wants to work in your life too. See you in the next video.